No.
Mm.
Okay. So, folks, we have the great pleasure of listening to Jay Shauer extemporize or go on. And I'm going to turn it right over to Jay. You tell them about yourself, Jay, a bit, if you would.
So, Shivaji. Shivaji is probably the most biggest hero in Hindu India. And I did want to show you this. Let me see if I can show this. Where's this? I want to show you this. Can you see this screen of
Yes.
India?
Yeah, we see the map.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now watch this. I'm going to type in Chhatrapati Shivaji. Okay.
Yeah.
Chhatrapati Shivaji, when you go fly into Bombay, you go to Chhatrapati Shivaji Airport. If you get to the railway station, it's Chhatrapati Shivaji Railway Station. Chhatrapati Shivaji is Shivaji. Chhatrapati means the parasol ruler, the ruler of everything under the parasol. He is the ruler of everything. Statues of him all over India. Everything is named Chhatrapati Shivaji in India these days. He is the Hindu hero that the BJP, the Hindu Nationalist Party, has selected to show as the hero of India versus Islam. And it is, I'm just showing you all these places. Look at them all. Look at
Yeah.
them. Look at the number. Look at this. These are all places in India named for Chhatrapati Shivaji. And here comes some more. It takes a little while for them to load up. There's more than 400 of them just in Google Maps. It's everywhere. This is the most important guy in India. Okay, I'm going back to here. If you go to a truck stop, you are liable to see a wall-sized painting of Shivaji meeting with various people, including down here a bunch of swooning Europeans who just love him so much. This is Shivaji with his goddess Bhavani, and the picture down here is of Shivaji with the murti or idol of his goddess. When you go to India, you probably have run into these places: Agra, Ahmednagar, Poona, and Bijapur. Certainly, probably Ahmednagar and Poona. Our area of places we go to in India, Poona and Ahmednagar, are so rich in history and are such a big deal with the history of Shivaji. So I'm just going to show you going through what happened in this area. Before Shivaji started, everything in green was the Mogul Empire, and below it were the things called the Deccani Sultanates. The Moguls had invaded India from Mongolia and taken over, and they formed this empire. Akbar was the big first emperor, and then he was followed by a variety of them, eventually to Shah Jahan, and finally Aurangzeb. All these names are important, and we'll get to them later. Don't worry about getting them now. Ahmednagar was one of the Muslim sultanates in India. And there were a bunch of others, Bijapur, Golconda, and like that. The Mughal Empire, which is what Shivaji fought against, took over all the Mughal sultanates under Emperor Aurangzeb. He turned everything into a Mughal empire, and he instituted a lot of Islamic law. Shivaji broke out of that empire and created this kingdom for himself. So he cut through the Mogul Empire like this swath right here. And he was the founder of what's called the Maharashtrian Empire, the Maratha Empire, which took over most of India and was the main power in India when the British came to rule. So just to go back through it really quick, there was Moguls and the Deccani Sultanates. Then the Moguls took over everything. Then Shivaji tore out a bunch of this and made it into a Hindu kingdom. And eventually the Hindu kingdom took down the Mughal Empire. So Shivaji is a big honking deal in India. Okay? If you're in Ahmednagar, this is Ahmednagar Fort. The Emperor Aurangzeb died in Ahmednagar, and this is a memorial to him, the place where he died. When he died, they had a caisson that took him from Ahmednagar up to Khuldabad, where he's buried. Khuldabad is right next to the Ellora Caves. Every stop that the caisson made, they built a mosque at that stopping place. The first place he stopped was Imampur, and they built the Imampur Mosque there. The Imampur Mosque is the place where the new life ended. It's where Baba and the bird incident happened, and Eric was trying to get the bird, and Baba said, "Oh, you got the bird. Now the new life's all over. Everybody step outside and spit on me and hit me with their sandals, and now the new life's over." Does everybody remember that incident? This is where it was. It's part of the Shivaji Aurangzeb story, and that's why I'm bringing it up. Oh, I wanted to show you something else. Wait a minute. I want to show you how I got into this. Where is that? I got my inspiration for writing up the story of Shivaji at his tomb in Khuldabad. This is his father's tomb. It's in the Taj Mahal. You'll see that the Taj Mahal is a big, honking, fancy, amazing place. Everything's marble. All the Mughal emperors built these giant tombs for themselves. And the Shah Jahan tomb is the biggest of the bunch. Aurangzeb's father. This is the tomb of Aurangzeb's father versus the tomb of Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb was such a devout Muslim. He didn't believe that there should be a tomb for him. He was buried in a plain plot of ground. His burial place is covered with soil. These are plants growing out of the soil of his tomb. Later on in the 1900s, they built this marble edifice around this little plot of land, which is in the middle of Khuldabad. I went in and sat in this place by mistake. I thought I was visiting the mosque of the two hairs in Khuldabad. There's a mosque that has two hairs of the Prophet Muhammad. And I walked into this doorway and I thought, oh, I'm in the mosque of the two. What is this? And I was tired and I sat down against the wall and I started figuring out that I was actually in the tomb of Aurangzeb. And as I was figuring this out, I had a vision. I had my brain sort of opened up and an electric current flew into my brain and I saw a whole story about I'm thinking about how to say this. About a hydra. What is a hydra? What is it when, I'm sorry, I'm losing the word. What is it when they cut off somebody's balls and he's a eunuch? Many of the servants in this time were eunuchs. The eunuchs had a huge amount of power. And I had this vision of a eunuch in the court of Shah Jahan with Shah Jahan's daughter, Roshanara. And I saw this entire scene unfold in my brain, like fast forward 2 years worth of activities. And I said, oh, I could write a story about this. And I did. That was the start of the story that I wrote called Tiger Claws. That's how come I'm interested in Shivaji and Aurangzeb. So far, so good. Anybody, any questions, comments, anything at this point? Am I being too confusing?
No, but
So,
I'm amazed this history is so late. I thought this was much earlier stuff. This was
This
seven.
is all 1630s to 1700.
Yeah.
Shivaji was born in 1730. Okay, let me see if I can't, I'm trying to see if I can see my notes.
so who again was the father? Aurangzeb
Shah Jahan.
was the
Shah
father.
Jahan was the guy who built the Taj Mahal. Aurangzeb was Taj Mahal's son.
You mean Shah
Okay,
Jahan?
Shah Jahan. Let me see if I can remember my stuff here. Okay. You need to understand the times a little bit. India was the richest place in the whole honking world. By the time of Aurangzeb and the time of Shah Jahan, India was producing most of the gold in the world, all of the gemstones in the world, all the diamonds, all the sapphires, all the rubies, and most of the emeralds came out of India. They were honking rich. Unbelievable.
QKHTGT6Q.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me turn that off.
Jay, we have there's a bit of an echo in your voice. I wonder if you sat back just a bit from the mic. If it's okay, but I don't know.
I don't have a mic. Anyway, I'll do my best. Uh,
You think we should all mute?
what?
Yeah,
Do you
yes,
think we
everybody.
should all mute?
Yes, let's do that. Let's mute everybody.
But feel free to unmute and ask questions, okay? Okay. So we think of ourselves in modern times when kingdoms are sort of related to parliaments and common activities where the people have some say in the matter. At the time of that we're talking about, kingdoms were all powerful. All powerful. King was all powerful. Kings owned everything. Kings owned all the land, and they granted access to certain people to have the use of the land. But it was still their land, and anything that was on the land was theirs. So all the money that was available to the land, all the profit, all the crops, everything that was done on the land ended up going to the treasury of the king. Somebody finds gold, the king says, yeah, that's my gold. Give it to me. Oh, I'll give you 5% of the gold you find, like that. When in these times, it was kind of a capture the flag mentality. If you saw something you wanted, you just ran over and beat the guy up who had it and took it from him. So that's how it worked. And the way it worked with these sultanates, the sultans of the sultanates were effectively kings of the sultanate. And if you wanted a different, if you wanted a sultan to be taken away and wanted to take all the stuff, you just went over and took it. You just took all the stuff. You go over there and bring your army over and defeat his army, and you'd own everything. This is how most of the world worked, and this is particularly how India worked. Just capture the flag. Within the sultanates and within the kingdoms, if you wanted to be a big deal, you would take your money and go to the king and say, I will now provide you with some stuff. I'll provide you with money, weapons, an army, and horses. So people who wanted to have power with the king they go and say, "Here's all my stuff," and "What are you doing?" "I'm giving you 1,000 horses." 1,000 horses equated to, I think, 10 or 100 men per horse. And you'd say, "I'm giving you an army with weapons and the people to run it. I am giving you 100 horses." And you give that to the king, and the king would then say, "Okay, here's a bigger patch of land for you. Here's how you pay for it, is because now you have a bigger patch of land." That's that's the situation here. How did you get that bigger patch of land? Well, you went over to the guy next door and beat him up and killed him and took his stuff. This is going on all over India. People creating little armies, going and attacking other people and taking their stuff. So there was a constant change. People just taking stuff and taking stuff. And once you owned the stuff, you set the rules. Your rules were the rules. Oh, you're all being taxed at 60% of your income. Oh, everybody now is a Muslim, like that. That's how it worked. It wasn't a thing where a bunch of parliamentarians got together and made a decision when authorized this. King just did whatever the heck he wanted. Okay? So all the people that we're talking about were people who just took stuff. And Shivaji ended up being one of those people. Now, Shivaji's grandfather was just a plain dirt farmer in Maharashtra, and he had a vision of a green hand coming out of the earth and waving at the soil, and he ignored it. But then a couple of weeks later, he saw the green hand come out and wave at the soil again. So he went over and dug, and he found a whole pile of gold. He was suddenly very rich. So he went to his king, who was the Sultan of Ahmednagar, and said, I want to be a big deal here. I'm going to give you 100 horse. And so the king said, "Oh, that's great." So the grandfather took the money, bought weapons, bought horses, paid up to create a mercenary army. That army then ran across various places in Ahmednagar, taking other people's stuff. And the grandfather had a son called Shaji, and Shaji was a pretty smart guy. Now, in those days, the military was just basically money, horses, and weapons. And the only difference between the militaries were the tactics and the treachery. The tactics were mostly, you guys go over there and kill everybody you can find. But sometimes they used actual tactics like, let's do this by night. They'll be surprised. Oh, we'll hide in the bushes. That'll be interesting. Things like that. Tactics were rather unusual. Mostly it was just, you guys kill those guys. Shaji used tactics, and he did quite well taking other people's stuff. He became the biggest general in the Sultanate of Ahmednagar. He was taking so much stuff, he was going down lower to Bijapur, which is south of Ahmednagar, and he started taking Bijapur's stuff. And the Bijapuris came back and started raising their army against Shah Jahan, and eventually they beat him up so bad that he decided to abandon all his forts and go to Bijapur. Now, at that time, Shah Jahan had two kids. One of them was Shivaji, and the other one was Shaji Jr. or something. And he decided that he would leave his wife and take his kid to Bijapur. Now, Shivaji was born in the middle of the fights between Shah Jahan and the Bijapuris. So Shah Jahan had had his wife sent to a little fort called Shivneri, where Shivaji was born, and that was in 1630. Shivaji was born in 1630, and he was hidden with his mother in this little fort that Shah Jahan was in charge of. And he was raised there by his mother, and Shah Jahan decided he was going to leave his wife, Jijabai, and go down to Bijapur and live with his mistress. And he was going to take his two kids along with him to Bijapur. So at 10 years old, 1640, Shah Jahan, not Shah Jahan, I'm sorry, Shahji, I keep saying Shah Jahan. Shahji, the general, Shivaji's father, went to Bijapur to be with his mistress, who became his wife. He got rid of his old wife. She was still in the fort, Shivner, and he tried to be a big deal in the court of the Sultan of Bijapur. Everybody good so far? Am I being clear enough?
You might want to stop screen share or and maybe show the map of
Okay, let's go back to a map. All right, let's go to a map.
Ralph has a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ralph? Ralph, did you have a question? Ralph? Maybe he's not able to talk.
Okay. So this shows where Ahmednagar was, which was where Shahji was a big deal. And he went down to Bijapur, where he tried to be a big deal. And he actually was a big deal. They made him his best, their best general. They gave him all kinds of honors. Now, while Shivaji was there, he was not used to being in an actual place with a civilized country, and B, not used to being around a bunch of Muslims. Everybody he'd been with was Hindu, and he was shocked when they took him one day through the town and he saw all the butcher shops killing cows. He was so horrified. So he had a bunch of Hindu buddies that he was hanging around with, little kids like him. And he and his buddies went to the butcher shops and started breaking everything up. They broke up all the butcher shops. And the Hindus who were in the area decided to help the kids. And the next thing you know, it was just a mess in Bijapur. And the Sultan of Bijapur called Shahji in and said, "We don't like your kid." So Shahji decided that he would send his kid back to Poona. So far, so good? Okay. So
Okay.
Poona did not exist at this time. Poona was a dot on a map that Shahji happened to own. He sent his best guy, his best business manager, a guy named Dadaji, to Poona to build a house for Shivaji and Shivaji's mother, Jijabai. So Dadaji went there and discovered that the entire place where Poona had been ransacked and destroyed by the Moguls. It was nothing but a wasteland. They'd even done a thing where they buried an iron bar in the ruins of Poona to say, yeah, when you can figure out how to dig up this bar and get rid of it, then you'll be able to rebuild Poona. So one of the things that Dadaji did was to dig up the bar and take what's called golden plows. I have no idea whether they're really gold. And he redug up the area around Poona. At that time, Poona was just a wasteland and had wolves everywhere. There were so many wolves that Dadaji created a bounty on wolves. And within just about 6 or 8 months, he had more than 400 wolf skins. And they slowly started to civilize the area. When people discovered that a Hindu guy was now trying to help out Poona, they all started moving down to Poona, started creating farms, started creating a town, and that was how Poona got made. So Shivaji, the son in Poona, was growing up there, and he was a standard teenager, so he formed a gang. He formed a gang, and they had horses, and they went into the hills, and Poona was right in the middle of a trade route. Lots of stuff was traveling between this area up here, which is where Surat is, Satara, where Bombay is, which was a Portuguese port. Surat was a Portuguese port that was being used by the English. Goa was where all the Portuguese hung out. And there was a trade route from Agra to Surat to Bombay to Goa. And Poona was right in the middle of the trade route. So Shivaji and his little gang hung out in the hills, and they would attack caravans. And every once in a while, they'd attack a very rich caravan. So after at about age 16, Shivaji ended up being fairly rich with stolen goods. And people from other areas, for example, Bijapur, were really pissed at Shivaji. In that area, in outside Poona, see if I can get to a map. There's a fort called Torna. This is about 15, 20 miles outside of Poona. And Torna Fort was in the middle of a monsoon. And in the middle of the monsoon, the commander of the fort decided he'd had it with rain, and nobody was going to attack the fort in a monsoon. So him and his buddies just went down to Poona and got drunk. And Shivaji discovered that they were all down there. The fort was basically unoccupied. So he and his gang crawled up to the top of the fort, put the Shivaji flag, whatever it was, onto Torna Fort and said, now we own Torna Fort. We captured the flag. Within a couple of weeks, there was another fort nearby where Shivaji discovered that there was a guy who he could steal the fort from. That that he would just give the guy enough money, and the guy would take all his soldiers and they complete the fort. So Shivaji brought in more of his gang and occupied that fort and put up a flag. He was now kind of a big deal in the area, and there was a third fort nearby where there were three brothers who were arguing over who should get the fort after their father, the main general of the fort, had died. So they called Shivaji up and said, listen, will you help us figure out who should get the fort? And he said, sure, I'll come by. Now, at that time, the monsoon was about to come again, and the people were bringing up sheaves of, what's the stuff, sorghum. You bring up sorghum in big chunks, you've probably seen those wagons full of sorghum if you've driven around the area. And they bring up the sorghum and they lay it on top of the buildings so the buildings would resist some of the rainfall. So Shivaji had his soldiers hide weapons in big sheaves of sorghum, and then he had a whole little caravan of sorghum carriers carrying weapons up to this fort where he was supposed to decide who was going to get the fort. So he went up there and sat down, and the brothers came and said, who gets the fort? And Shivaji said, surprise, I do. And his men jumped out from underneath the sorghum sheaves, took out their weapons, and killed everybody. So Shivaji now had 3 forts, and Bijapur was starting to pay attention. You've probably seen this picture of Baba and Arthur's seat in Mahabaleshwar. That's about, I guess, 50 miles outside of Poona. And the Bijpuris sent a whole bunch of raiding parties into Shivaji's territory, and they started taking the flag from Shivaji. They would take over farms, they'd take over little fiefs, they'd take over everything. And Shivaji was having a hard time putting them down. And they finally Finally, the Bijapuris and Shivaji decided to have a peace council and try and figure out what they could do to make peace. And they had it at this fort, Pratapgarh Fort. So Shivaji was meeting with a general called Afzal Khan. Afzal Khan was literally a giant. He was like 7 feet tall and weighed about 350 pounds. He's a big guy. And Shivaji's advisor said, do not go in there thinking you're going to talk. He's going to kill you. And he said, no, it's peace talk. They'll be good. They said, well, listen, we want you to wear mail underneath your shirt because we think he's going to try to kill you. So he went in and wore a mail shirt. And they said, also, you ought to have a weapon. They said, no, they're going to search me for weapons. He said, yeah, but we got a weapon they won't find. It's called tiger claws. Tiger claws are a weapon that can be hidden in the palm of the hand. And what you see here is a depiction of what happened at that time. When the peace talks started, Afzal Khan came over and said, let me give you a big hug, Shivaji. Shivaji went over to get his big hug, and Afzal Khan took out a dagger and started stabbing him in the chainmail shirt, which he didn't expect. At which point Shivaji took out the tiger claws and ripped out his guts. Now, this is a big honking deal for a lot of people. Okay, this event is big honking deal for a lot of people. This was the establishment of Shivaji's superiority over the Bijapuris. He had killed their main general. He'd taken over their big-ass Pratapgarh fort. I should mention that how he took over the fort was Afzal Khan had walked up a huge army to show off how big and strong the Bijapuris were, right up this road that led to the fort. And Shivaji hid all his men in the bushes beside the road. So when he came out and said, oh, I just killed Afzal Khan, the Marathis attacked the Bijapuris from the bushes. And the Bijapuris are going, wait a minute, I thought it was a thing where you say, go over there and kill those guys. I didn't know we were going to get attacked. And they all got attacked and they all died. The main Bijapuri army was wiped out at this fort by the Marathis. It was a big deal. This is where they buried Afzal Khan. It's about a mile away from the fort. And this site is a site of lots of commemoration by Muslims who hate Hindus for being treacherous. So they come down to this Dargah, this tomb, every couple of weeks and have a big festival called We Hate Hindus because they are terrible people. And the government actually tried to destroy this. The Indian government in about 20 years ago decided they were going to destroy this Dargah. And it was such a big honking deal that they ended up saying, okay, now it's destroyed, but it's still there. Just it's no good. It's destroyed. They have the fiction that it is destroyed. And people come to Pratapgarh Fort to celebrate Hindu superiority over Indian Muslims, and Muslims come to this destroyed Dargah to celebrate how horrible the Hindus are to the Muslims. Okay? This is modern day politics, and it's all because of Shivaji. Now, I'm going to talk about an event that happened much later, but I don't want to miss it because it's just too honking great. This fort here in the green, can you see this fort? This fort is called Sindhgad, and it's the Lion Fort. And at the top, you see gorpots, monitor lizards. I heard about this fort and I could not believe what I heard. My driver, my taxi driver, was telling me a story about a house that he was at in Ahmednagar, where one of these lizards somehow or other crawled into the internal walls of the house and was making a lot of noise. So people were trying to capture it and pull it out of the internal walls. Somebody managed to get a rope looped around the Gorpat's neck. And then my driver said he and at least 20 other people tried to pull it out of the house with all their might. These things, these monitor lizards have suckers on their paws that are so powerful they can hang on to anything. Now, Sing a God, I don't know, can you see this? This is the last wall of the fort. It was unprotected. They had all these I don't know, bastions or something, where they would shoot arrows down and be able to attack anybody who was trying to get into a fort by the normal way. But this wall was so sheer, it's about 150 feet high, that they didn't bother to protect it. Nothing was getting past this wall. It wasn't like they were going to have a bunch of horses climb up the wall. What Shivaji's main general, Tanaji, did was to take a Gorpad lizard and send it up the wall and hang on with a rope. And he crawled up the side of this wall with rope. Then he let down other ropes, and his men came climbing up the ropes up this sheer unprotected wall of Singad Fort. And they went in, the men who had crawled up the wall went in and started killing everybody. And Tanaji, the general who had done the climbing up with the Gorpad lizard, got himself killed. He's a big honking deal in Poona. You will see lots of memorials to Tanaji with his missing hand. They cut off his hand and then he died. And you'll see these statues of this guy raising the sword and having a missing hand in the other arm, because Tanaji is a big hero in Poona because of this event. And I wanted to tell you about it because it's just too honking cool and it's part of the Shivaji story, but it didn't happen until much, much later in history, and I would have missed it because I would have had to put it at the end of the history. Okay, going on. Eventually, we get to Aurangzeb. So much is going on in Maharashtra with Shivaji. So many people are flocking, so many Hindus are flocking to Shivaji to rebel against the Mogul Empire, that Shivaji is now becoming a big, scary deal to the Moguls. They even sent one of their best armies up to try and put him down, and he completely destroyed it. And it so flipped out Aurangzeb that he said, I got to figure out how to make peace with this guy. So this is Agra, the Red Fort. Now let's talk about Aurangzeb a little bit. Aurangzeb was part of how the Mughal Empire figured out who the next Shah was going to be. So they had Akbar was their first big Shah, and then he was replaced by Almagir, and then Almagir was replaced by Shah Jahan, and then Aurangzeb replaced his father, Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal. It wasn't a thing where the king said, hey, you're the next in line, you're going to be the next Shah. Oh, no. That was not how things worked in the Mughal Empire. How it worked in the Mughal Empire was the sons of the current Shah all figured out that individually they all decided they would kill the Shah and take over. They'd play capture the flag with their father. And so for 4 generations, individual sons of the current Shah would battle each other and then kill or capture the current Shah and take over the empire. And Aurangzeb did the same thing. He had 3 brothers. He raised all three brothers and Aurangzeb raised armies. They all sent armies against each other. They paid bribes. They sent poison around. They did everything. And eventually, Aurangzeb killed all his brothers and he captured his father and he put him into the Red Fort, which is overlooking the Taj Mahal.
Hmm.
You can see in this picture, you can see the Taj Mahal through part of the Red Fort. The Red Fort was gorgeous. It wasn't just a fort, it was a big palace inside. And
Who was the father's?
Aurangzeb stuck his father in this room, which we are now looking through the window that Aurangzeb's father, Shah Jahan, got to live out the last 10 years of his life, looking at the Taj Mahal from across the river. Aurangzeb took over everything. Aurangzeb was a fierce, devout Muslim who is called Almagir by the Muslims. It means justified ruler. They think of him and call him the fifth right-guided Caliph. The Caliph was the heir to Muhammad. Muhammad had four heirs, four caliphs called the right-guided caliphs. And the current Muslim community around the world call Aurangzeb the fifth right-guided caliph. Because what he did was try to create and systematize Sharia law, the law of the Quran, as the scholars saw fit. They made up the complete Almagir, Fatwa Almagiri, the book of the law of Muslim law. And Aurangzeb began taking Muslim law, and every place he went, he instituted Muslim law. So when he was trying to conquer Shivaji and Shivaji's kingdom, what he was doing was running in and taking everything he could from the Muslims and charging them a tax called the jizra, which was a special tax on non-Muslims. And every year, if you were a Hindu or a non-Muslim, you would have to go and appear at a tax collector and read a piece of paper or say from a piece of paper, I'm a real horrible person because I'm not a Muslim and here's my tax. He would force people to switch to being Muslim. He would take stuff that wasn't Muslim. He would do anything because he believed under his Fatwa Almagiri, his summation of Sharia law, that he had the right to do that as a representative of Islam.
I think we're good.
Is that a comment? Does somebody want to ask a question?
Well, I wonder if could you just briefly, can you hear me, Jay?
Briefly.
No, just go through the lineage of father.
KHTGT6Q.
Let's
Let's
see.
say it again, please.
The lineage, father to son, starting with I'm confused about the lineage from Shivaji to Shah, the
Shivaji's father was Shahji. That's the only one you need to know about.
okay.
Aurangzeb's father was Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal. That's the only one you need to know about.
All right.
This story right now, all we're doing is trying to figure out how Shivaji and Aurangzeb fought.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a lot of names. It's just a ton of names. Here we are, and we're looking at part of the Red Fort in Agra called the Diwaniyat. This is the Hall of Public Audience. Shivaji had been attacked by a Muslim general with Hindu roots. called Raj Singh, who was the guy who built what's it called? Oh geez, what's the place anymore? Anyway, he was a big guy. He built. I'm sorry, I'm losing track of all my information. Red Fort into the Umber. What's in Umber? Umber. If you go into Rajasthan, you'll see all these fancy looking forts and buildings. And he built the fort at Amber. It is the biggest fort and most beautiful fort I've ever seen anywhere. Just gorgeous. And he had really good tactics and really good armies. And Aurangzeb sent him to attack Shivaji, and he did a good job of it. He was tearing up Shivaji's army, and eventually he became convinced that Shivaji was a better ruler than Aurangzeb. So he put together a peace offering between them. He said, let's make peace between you guys. You should rule the Hindu kingdom that you've set up. You basically could turn that into a kingdom and you could rule it and you would be a good ruler. Let's take you down to talk to Aurangzeb and set that up as part of the Mughal Empire. And he arranged in Agra, which is where the Taj Mahal is, between Aurangzeb and Shivaji. So Shivaji went down to this place, the Hall of Public Audience, where Aurangzeb sat. Let me see what my next thing is. It is a fancy place, fanciest place he had ever been in his life. And he found himself in this courtyard area with all the subjects of Aurangzeb. And he's standing in order to humiliate him, to humble him just a bit. Aurangzeb had him standing at the far end of the courtyard. And Shivaji's looking around going, whoa, there are a lot of rich, smart guys here. I guess this is a pretty big honking deal. He was very impressed by the place, by being invited, by all this stuff. And they started talking to the people next to him. They said, hey, what kind of guy are you? He says, oh, I got 500 horse that I give to Aurangzeb. The guy next to him says, yeah, I got 1,000 horse I give to Aurangzeb. Shivaji's sitting there with 50,000 horse that he is about to offer to Aurangzeb. And he's sitting with all these little bitchy guys, and he can't believe he's stuck in the back. And he's so angry that he actually begins to shake and froth at the mouth and scream at Aurangzeb, you're a complete idiot, and stuff like that. Now, Aurangzeb's plan was to bring him forward and honor him from the rear with as kind of a symbolic thing. I'm bringing you forward up to the top of the courtyard. But Shivaji didn't know that part. He's literally screaming and thrashing around, and the soldiers come and take him, and Aurangzeb doesn't know what to do. So he sticks him in one of these many little red fort rooms with a little window that looks at the Taj Mahal and says, you stay here for a while. I got to figure out what to do with you. So Shivaji was captured and in the red fort for about 6 months, and there was no way for anybody to get in there and get him out. No way for him to communicate. No way to do anything. But they did send him a Hindu priest to look after him. And the Hindu priest said, I think you're really sick. And Shivaji says, I'm not sick. He said, I think you're really sick. And you now need to send big loads of candy to your goddess. He says, I do? Yeah. So the Hindu priest would bring in big, I don't even know what to call them, cartons of candy that took like 2 or 3 men to carry in on shoulder things, and they'd bring them in. The priest would bless the candy and say, now go send that to your goddess. And they did this. And every time they did it, the soldiers would see this, they think, oh, what if something's in that big box of candy? And they'd stick swords in it, and there was nothing in it but candy. And they did that for like 2 months. And eventually the soldiers got bored of sticking swords into the candy boxes. And Shivaji jumped into one and escaped in a candy box being taken to a temple. And he went from the temple and went back to his main fort, which is Raigad, which is in Mahabaleshwar. Let me see if I got a picture of it. I don't know, what time is it? I'm running out of time. And he, from there, began to reestablish his control of his kingdom after escaping from Aurangzeb.
Jay, we've got plenty of time. We've got at least another half hour.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm ready to stop at 11. I'm sorry, I don't have much more to say. I'll be happy to
Okay.
answer questions. Let me just fill you in on some of the stuff that happened after this. I'm gonna turn off my slideshow and you're gonna look at me. Okay, you're looking at me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So things did not end there. Aurangzeb came down into Shivaji's kingdom and tried to capture parts of it. It went back and forth for years and years and years. And eventually, Shivaji decided that he had enough power to actually have himself formally crowned as what he called the ruler of the Chhatrapati of Maharashtra, the Marathas. He became the Chhatrapati. Name means parasol ruler. Chhatra, parasol, and Pati, ruler. And he established himself and he began a dynasty that continued after his death. Aurangzeb was so disturbed by this activity that he actually moved the center of his court from Agra down to a little town that eventually became known as Aurangabad. So if you go to the Ellora Caves, you're probably on the road to Aurangabad, which is about 20 miles away from the Ellora Caves. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a nice little place. And there's this thing called the Baby Taj, which is a half-assed version of the Taj Mahal. When I saw it, I had never seen the Taj Mahal. And I thought, geez, is this what the Taj Mahal is going to be like? Because this is really half-assed. Then I saw the Taj Mahal and I couldn't believe how great it was. I spent 10 hours just looking at it. So there's a thing called the Baby Taj or the Mini Taj that is in Aurangabad. And eventually, Shivaji died, and his son Sambhaji was the titular heir to the throne. And Aurangzeb captured him and took him to a prison in the Ellora Caves. And when you go into the Ellora Caves, you're not the Ellora Caves, to what's the name of that place? Daulatabad Fort. Daulatabad Fort's the place with the big tower that you pass. It's a fort on top of a mountain that's been carved down. So it's just a sheer cylinder with a fort on top. They carved out everything around the side of the mountain to make it a cylinder. The fort's on top. As you're going to the lower cave, you look at me and say, I never saw a mountain look like a cylinder before. That's the Daulatabad Fort. That's where Aurangzeb kept Shambuji prisoner. The Indian government has recently officially changed the name of Aurangabad to Chhatrapati Sambhajinagar, the town of Shivaji's son, Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar. Aurangzeb would go down to the prison and cut off a chunk of Shambuji every couple of days, a finger or a toe or a nose or an ear, and he'd take it out to the top of the fort with great ceremony and throw it down to the Hindus who were screaming and yelling, let him go underneath. He was a very unpleasant person. He killed almost all his relatives. He killed his sons. He killed his wife. He died alone at about age 90, and nobody cared. After he died, the empire just disintegrated, and that's when the Maratha Empire took over. The Maratha Empire that Shivaji formed was not a religious empire. He had no problems with anybody being Hindu, Muslim, or everything. If you go to his palace in Raygad Fort, oh, I should tell you about going to Raygad Fort. It's just a fun story. Raygad Fort is up an extremely hard to travel road or trail that you can't get anything up with. So they've built a little I don't know what they call it, kettle cars, where they put
It's like a
a
car.
cable
It's almost like
car,
a ski lift.
cable car
It's
with
almost like
buckets.
yeah, it's almost like a ski lift.
Yeah, it's buckets attached to a
Yeah,
cable. And we went up
right.
there not too long after the cable car system got put in. And they said, sure, get into this bucket. Okay, so me and my driver got into the bucket. And they said, oh, we got to send some gasoline up there. I said, okay. So they put in these big G.I. Joe canisters of gasoline, none of which had any tops. So they put them in there, and we're in a bucket, and it's sloshing. We're moving back and forth, and the gasoline sloshing all over the floor. And then somebody gets in, and I say, who are you? And he says, oh, I'm the head of this whole area. I'm coming up to show you around. I said, okay. So we're sitting there, the three of us sloshing around, and the cable starts turning, and we're slosh, slosh, swing, swing. And we're getting up to the top of the mountain, and boom, it stops. We're like 50 feet from the top, hanging there with gasoline sloshing all over our feet. And the power, the walla there says, not to worry, sir, because we have alternate cable car engine, and soon it will begin. And sure enough, boom, boom, we start going up, and we start going up, and we get about 10 feet from the top, and stops. And the Wallace says, not to worry, sir, because we have men with cranks. And the next thing you know, a couple of big guys with giant metal cranks run out to the cable car top and start cranking us up. And after about 10 minutes, we go the last 10 feet to the top and get out. And then we had to go down later, but it was fun to get up there. And when you get to the top, they show you around the palace, and it's an interesting place because the place where Shivaji ruled from in that palace had a court area where the court would sit, and they still have laid out on the floor the positions for his advisors, and each advisor of a different faith. So the Muslim advisor, the Sikh advisor, the Hindu advisor, the they had the Shiva and the Vishnu type advisors there. Okay, I have like two more things to say, and then I'm totally done, because I could keep this up all day and I'm exhausted already. Let's talk about the name. It is Shivaji. It is not Shivaji. It is not that. Shivaji was named for the goddess Shiva, which is a name of Durga, the war goddess. So if you're in Maharashtra and you say Shivaji, they're all looking at you like, what an idiot you are. What you want to say is Shivaji or Shivaji, but not Shivaji, because that just means you're an idiot. Okay. So don't be an idiot. Call him Shivaji. That's pretty. Oh, I mentioned that Mayor Baba said Shivaji was his minor incarnation. In Francis Babazan's book, which is how I first heard about Shivaji, was the silent word. There's a little passage where, oh, you're raising your hand, Ralph? Hang on a second. Somebody will tell you to answer. Shivaji was, in the book, Francis describes a conversation where Shivaji says, every major incarnation like me and Ram and Krishna and everybody has a minor incarnation that shows up 300 years before or thereabouts. And the job of the minor incarnation is to set up the social and political structure that the major incarnation will appear in. And he said, Shivaji was my minor incarnation, and each of you were part of the Shivaji story. And he names all the various mandali as members of the Shivaji story. And if you go back if you look up Shivaji minor incarnation on the Mayor Baba website, you'll see the passage, or you can just go back to the silent word if you happen to have a copy and read it there. I think it's also in Lord Mayhair. Ralph had a question, I think.
Yes. I got a little lost.
Oh, you did? Me too.
Where Aurangzeb becomes concerned of Shivaji setting himself up in his empire and becoming so powerful, and moved headquarters, is it right, from Delhi or Agra to Aurangabad?
Aurangabad.
And he himself went to live there, is that correct?
That's correct.
And sort of
Because there was,
and he has a prisoner of some sort. He's throwing
after Shivaji's death, his son Sambhaji became the new ruler. And Aurangzeb captured him, took him to a prisoner, and chopped him up into little pieces.
Now, I read one account, and I'll just bring this briefly to maybe a little clarification, that Aurangzeb's forces had captured Shivaji's father and imprisoned him in some manner for some time.
It was the Bijapur. No, that was the Bijapur. Shivaji's father, was captured by the Bijapuris and eventually released.
I got you. Yeah.
I'm seeing a hand for Diana Goodhart.
Yeah, this has been really fun, Jay. And my question is a little shift from the history. I've just enjoyed these pictures you've shown so much. And I'm guessing that you photographed.
None of them.
No.
Not a one.
Why not?
Because I can't find them. I got them on Google. The only thing I have a picture of is that truck stop mural. That's the only personal picture.
Oh.
I just found them all on Google. They're all famous places.
But they're so beautiful. They're just beautiful, beautiful places.
Google's great.
I can imagine being there and just, how spectacular it would be.
Yes. Just avoid the cable car.
Yeah. That's it.
That's all?
Yeah.
Jeff, Jeff Beadle.
What I wanted was to hear what it was like to be there, if you had any other personal stories, but
oh yeah, I got personal stories, but this isn't the personal stories about Shivaji places. Actually, if you were smart, you would get out of the NPR and take a tour of Ahmednagar. Ahmednagar is spectacularly full of history. Ahmednagar Fort is spectacular. It's the second most impenetrable fort in India from the time of the Moguls. And it's spectacular. The elephant doors, there's a river that runs right past it. There are kingfishers flying around. I never saw kingfishers before. It's gorgeous. And it's kept as a historic point because it's the place where Nehru was kept prisoner by the British. And a bunch of Indian freedom fighters or whatever were kept prisoner there during Gandhi's time of transition. So if you go there, you'll see some serious history and serious fort history. Then there's also, there's so many places. No one's ever been to the Tank Museum, the place that we can't go to now. That military complex was set up as the Military Transport Institute for India. And they have a huge collection of army tanks, the second largest collection of army tanks in the world. And you used to go down there and they take you an hour to walk past all these tanks. And you'd see them in different historical stages of development and everything. Fantastic. There's so much stuff in Ahmednagar. Call up Prashant, the taxi driver, hand him 500 rupees and take a one-day tour of Ahmednagar. You will be amazed. Does that sort of answer your question, Diana? Kinda. Then you got to go. Oh my God! You got to go to Aurangabad. You got to go to Ellora. Did you see this? I need to go back to the slideshow. Let me start it up again, if that's okay. I'm going to show you some stuff if I can figure out how to do it. Where am I? Yeah, I want to show you the Valley of Saints. Slideshow from current slide.
We have lots of time. If you've got the energy, we don't have anything until 5 o'clock today. So
Oh wow, I'm going to be done any second now. I'm just going to collapse. All right, let's see what we got. Khuldabad. Oh my God, Khuldabad.
we're not seeing it.
Khuldabad.
We
I'm
don't
going to
see
show you some stuff about Khuldabad. All right, from current slide. Okay. If I can figure out how to make this go down.
We're
Now,
not.
where's my Zoom?
Okay.
Share screen. Share. All right. Okay, let me see. Where's my slideshow? All right. If you go to Ellora Caves, and you definitely should go to Ellora Caves. If you have been to Ellora Caves, you have missed a fantastic place. You got to get out of the NPR and you got to go to Ellora. If you get to Ellora, you can get to Khuldabad. Khuldabad is an area that's overlooking the Valley of the Saints. The Valley of the Saints is about 2 miles down the road from the Ellora Caves. It's called the Valley of Saints because in about 1500-ish, Persia kicked out all the Sufis. And roughly 1,500 Sufis trekked into India and asked for asylum, and they all ended up in the area around where the Ellora Caves are. And they all died, and they all got buried there. So this area that you're seeing is filled with the graves of Sufi saints. It is a tremendous place of pilgrimage for Muslims, Islamic Sufis. But right now, the Indian government is tearing the place up and knocking the gravestones over and removing any markers of the 1500 saints that were buried there. So you better move fast if you're going to see it. Near the caves, near that place is a hill. That picture we saw was taken from a tall hill that overlooks the Valley of the Saints. If you climb up the hill, you will come to this door right here. Go back. Where am I? This door right here is a tiny doorway that is built into the hill that covers a small cave. That cave is where Sai Baba achieved enlightenment. He was visited by a Muslim saint who had died by about 200 years before, a saint called Zarzari Zarbakhsh. Zarzari Zarbakhsh has this mosque or this complex in Khuldabad. And inside that stairway is this beautiful tomb of Zarzari Zarbakhsh and his wife and his followers. And this has become a very, very active place of pilgrimage. All the old people who were taking care of it are dead. And now it's a bunch of youngsters and people about 25, 30 years old have now taken over, taking care of this complex. And they are doing an amazing job. And they love this story of Sai and Zarzari Zarbakhsh. So Sai Baba is a big deal, as you know, a perfect master of Meher Baba. And his town in Shirdi has just turned into a metropolis of crazy ass pilgrimage. It's astonishing. Hotels by the score, giant apartment complexes, which are where pilgrims stay. It's not a little NPR. It's literally a whole suite of 10-story apartment complexes where pilgrims get put up for the day. The line to get into Sai Baba's tomb and see his tomb is 50,000 people a day. The government took over the Sai Baba Trust because they were worried about taxation, a bunch of other things, and they took it over and they began promoting Sai Baba as a wish-fulfilling guru. Now, in the middle of Shirdi, as you drive in, you will see a 30 or 40 foot tall statue of Sai Baba right in the middle of town. It's not like when I went there the first time. I couldn't even, I drove past the place, went, wait a minute, what's that? And that was where Sai Baba's complex was. It was practically unnoticeable. Now there's hotels with water slides on top and Chinese restaurants. It's astonishing. So Shirdi, Sai Baba, Khuldabad is a little town at the top of the hill above the Valley of the Saints. And in Khuldabad, there are two famous things. And one thing is Aurangzeb's tomb, which is something you will walk by if you can't figure out where it is. It's practically unmarked. And a mosque, which you probably will see, which is the Mosque of the Two Hairs, which is where two hairs of Muhammad are kept. Every year they have a giant procession where they march the two hairs out and people just crowd around to get a look at the two hairs of Muhammad as they're carried down the street. It's definitely Muslim India at its finest, and I definitely recommend it for a little trip. And it's not far This whole thing, Alora, Khuldabad, Saibab's Cave, everything, that's a day trip out of the NPR. Jeff Beadle has his electronic
Ajanta Caves is also worth seeing if you have a second.
I haven't been there.
You haven't? Yeah, it's
No,
nice.
are they good?
Anyway, my question was, oh, by the way, Raigad, when I was there in 2016, was the cable car was not nearly as precarious as when you were there. They seem to have made some improvements based on your
Yeah,
story.
they probably did.
Yeah, but my question is, when you get to the top of Raigad, there by Shivaji's Samadhi, there's graves for his dogs also.
Oh, I
Or
didn't
at
see
least
that.
one. Okay, well then I was wondering if one of them was also named Warrior, like Baba's Warrior.
I didn't know there were dog graves.
There were dog graves right by there. Yeah, there were. Anyway, but I thought that was interesting because now Baba had his beloved dogs as well. So
Well, remember that I was being shown around by a government representative, and
yeah,
he was full of propaganda and not full of sainthood.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, also, do you ever come across in your research anything about his connection with the perfect masters of the day, like Ram Dass of Sarnath?
Ram Dass was the perfect master of Shivaji, and
I mean, he had
Ram
perfect
Dass,
masters that
Shivaji
he dealt.
offered him his kingdom, and Ram Dass
Right.
took it and then handed it back to him and said, "Now do this kingdom in my name."
I see. Okay.
There was also
And then he also-
Turan was another
Right.
perfect master of the age at that time,
Right.
and he was writing up Hindu scriptures or stories in Marathi, which was a big deal because they'd all been in Sanskrit or like that, or Hindi, and he was translating them into Marathi. So that was an interesting thing, bringing the scriptures to the people,
Right.
sort of
Sure.
the King James version of the Bible.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, thank you so much. Great talk. I appreciate it.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Gonna write that one down. Any other questions or anything going on here?
Who was the person who doing the translating the Marathi? Who was that?
Tukaram.
Oh, Tukaram. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh. Jay, it's just so tantalizing. If you have energy, if you would, it seems like we could revisit so many sections of this talk and get a whole, you could probably do a whole course, and maybe you're not feeling so energetic, but wow, we would so appreciate any way you'd want to present it, any further it's fascinating, and it feels like it was just the tip of the iceberg. Wow, it would be wonderful to hear more.
Well,
Cheryl.
what I would most like to do is to get anybody who's listening interested in exploring more. Because there's just so much history right around the place where we are. Just so much history, so much wonderful stories. If you're reading about Shivaji in a Meher Baba book, this is where it all happened. This is where Meher Baba set up shop. He didn't do it in like New Jersey. He set up shop in Ahmednagar. So it's useful to know the Indian aspects of Baba's nature. And that's what I think I've enjoyed exploring. I got Odile wants to say something. Unmute yourself, Odile. Unmute. Odile.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so I have two questions. First of all, what are the titles of the books you wrote about all this?
The
And okay, And I also want to know if you know of any reincarnation of Aurangzeb.
No, I don't.
Okay.
But let me say one thing, which is when I heard this thing about minor incarnations, I went back through my limited knowledge and said, where are there other minor incarnations? And it got me thinking about Jesus. And about 200 years before the birth of Jesus was Judas Maccabees, who kicked out the Syrians from Jerusalem. They had destroyed the temple, and he reopened and rededicated the temple. And it was into that environment that Jesus was born, into the newly to the Pharisees took over instead of the Sadducees in Jerusalem, took over the temple, and he was born into a country that had been rededicated to Judaism with Pharisaical Judaism. And anyway, so I'm starting to write a book about him. The books I wrote about Shivaji, I wrote one giant manuscript, literally this big, that I sent to an agent. I think it was 2,000 pages long, called Tiger Claws. And the agent loved it and hated it, and sent it to a bunch of people, said it was going to be the biggest thing since Shogun. And I was convinced it was going to be great and I would make a ton of money. And then nobody wanted it. She said, couldn't you have written a shorter book with a romance in it? So I wrote a second book called The Temple Dancer, about a minor character from the first book and the bigger book. And that one is about Shivaji's father and his involvement with the temple dancer that led to his rise in Bijapur. And it's filled with eunuchs. The eunuchs of that time were the deep state of India. They controlled everything. It's an amazing bit of history, is the eunuchs of the courts of the Indian rulers. They controlled all the courts, they controlled all the power. And they had no offspring, and they couldn't keep the stuff that the rulers gave them. So they would be endowed with huge amounts of money and power and land grants and all sorts of stuff. And then they died because they died early. And the Sultan or whoever just take it all back and find another eunuch to pretend to hand it to. It's an interesting life. And eventually, about 100 years after Shivaji, some eunuch actually took over a sultanate and was the first eunuch ruler of a sultanate in India. Very interesting story. My book is called Tiger Claws. That's the Shivaji story. And the other book is called The Temple Dancer. And they're both out of print in the US. They're still in print in Germany and being sold in supermarkets. But in the United States, if you look on Amazon, you can find used copies or Kindle versions.
Okay, thank you.
And they're translated into 10 languages. I made all my money from the translations, none from the US version.
Yes.
Well, now we know.
There are two Cheryls with hands raised.
Let's, well, Cheryl? Cheryl?
Jill Davis.
I muted myself. Yeah, I wanted to know, you must have had some really interesting conversations, I would assume, with some of the Mandalay regarding Shivaji. Could you share any of those with us?
They never talked to me about it.
And you didn't ask them?
I don't know, probably not.
I don't imagine you didn't
When I
ask
go to India and I'm in Maharashtrian or Meherabad, I'm not talking to anybody about anything to Baba.
well, I mean, because Baba must have said things to Mani, some of the others about Shivaji. Yeah, Shivaji. It's only been recent years that I heard the Shivaji thing, and people there in India were around, where I was staying, which was Mehrabad. I don't know that it was Baba people, but insisting it's Shivaji. So thank you for that clarification. Now I have to make sure I say it right. Anyhow,
Yeah.
that's curious.
Be a rebel. Be a rebel and say, yeah, come on. Shivaji. He's named for a goddess. Shivaji. How hard is that?
Yeah. Well, I know I tried to get out of Eric some of the history of when Muhammad was alive, Baba as Muhammad, but he very much didn't want to say very much. I remember that very clearly. I just thought you might have had some interesting conversations.
I might have, but I didn't. I'm sorry, Cheryl. Thank you. I now feel stupid.
Oh, good. I don't believe it, but anyway. And you aren't. Thanks. This has been fantastic. I just wish
I'm glad you picked it.
I'm sorry.
Jill Davis has her hand raised.
Oh yes, can you hear me?
I can.
So Jay, as far as romance goes, I want to mention through Elizabeth Patterson's article on Blue Bus Tours, she mentions a grave that belonged to Jahanara, who was the daughter of the Taj Mahal guy.
Yes.
And then Jahanara's niece, Zebunisa, and I wish I could remember the source of this. There's a legend that when Shivaji was captured by Aurangzeb, her father, she helped him escape and she fell in love with him, but he wouldn't marry her. And Aurangzeb imprisoned her. And for the last 20 years of her life, she wrote poems about her love for God awakened by Shivaji. So there's a romance, if I can just find the sources.
Well, that'd be great. Yeah, Jahanara figures in the way Ahmednagar usurped the throne. He kept going to Jahanara, his sister, and saying, "Don't you think I should be the next Shah? Don't you think that?" And he was just trying to persuade her brothers to hand over stuff to him, which they eventually did, and then he killed them. But she was a part of that whole setup. She was a part of the conspiracy to get Aurangzeb the throne.
Well, I thought that she preferred her brother Dara because Dara.
Well, yeah, everybody preferred Dara. Dara was kind of fun. Dara used to go out and face mad elephants alone and hit them with a big club until they fell down. Dara was nice. He was very accepting. He was not bigoted. He didn't have bigotry toward the Hindus. He wanted to have a similar type of arrangement like Akbar did, of allowing people to follow their own faiths in his kingdom. And Aurangzeb was
That's fascinating. I mean, I agree. I wish you would do a series of talks on this because there's so much more you know, and it's so interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not a historian. I'm a storyteller. So if I can't find an exact story, I forget it. I mean, seriously, my knowledge of this stuff is story after story after story. And when I go back and actually read history versions, I go, "Oh, did all that happen too? I had no idea." It's amazing. I will say that I wrote the original Shivaji Wikipedia story, which is still online on the Jimdo page for Wikipedia. And that was completely taken over by Muslim fanatic editors who tore it apart and turned it into a complete mess. I'd also written the original stories about the Taj Mahal, or one of the major revisions of the Taj Mahal that made it a featured article. That's been ripped up. The story about Aurangzeb that I wrote up for Wikipedia is completely ripped up. When in about 2016, I think it was, no, 2000, when was it? 1998, if I remember right. A new biography of Shivaji was written by a guy from the University of Minnesota. And in that, he described how Shivaji had used Muslims, integrated Muslims and Hindus together in his ruling of the kingdom. It caused a massive bunch of fallout. The research that he had done was done at a institute in Poona that keeps the histories of Shivaji. And 500 black-shirted Muslims, Hindus, went down to that institute, tore the place up, kicked out and beat up the people who had helped him write the book, took all the papers that he had gotten, threw them on a pile and burned them. And it was a big honking deal, this violent act that had taken place on this institute. And it caused big controversy. And eventually it got brought up in front of the Indian Congress, where it was discussed at great length. And the Indian Congress came down hard and said, this has got to stop. We now are finding that the author of that book has caused treason against the Indian government, and we condemn him to death. And he had a arrest warrant, international arrest warrant, put out where he was to be brought to India and face charges of treason and possibly death. So he kind of hid out. And during that time was when I changed my author's name from Jay Shauer to John Speed, which is a little bit harder to find. So my books are written under the pen name John Speed. And when I was writing these Wikipedia articles up about Aurangzeb and Shivaji, I was getting lots of little death threat notices from Muslim editors of Wikipedia, saying, we know where you live. I know you don't.
Wow.
But yeah, it was an interesting time. And that, I think that guy has died. I think the Minnesota author has died, but he died under threat of arrest and death.
Jay, if you stop sharing, your voice is clearer, I think. That's what your voice is a little muddled when you're talking over the screen share. I don't know why. Also, we have one more, Cheryl. Are you there, Cheryl?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Maybe it's.
I think that was the ghost of her getting online.
Okay.
The ghost of Cheryl.
Well, actually, my name is Cheryl, if we want to pronounce names correctly, like Shivaji, it's Cheryl. No, I didn't have another question. I have to double myself because my computer's audio is really bad. And I really don't feel like spending a whole hunk more of money to hire somebody to come in and try and fix it. Just overnight, about a year ago, this happened, or 9 months, and I just can't financially do it. There are too many other important things to do. But that's why I appear twice often on Baba Zoom and other platforms, because I use my smartphone for audio and my computer so I can see all everybody's reactions. If they have their face out there, here, I'll turn this back on again. And I kind of mute myself often, and I put myself on no video because I don't know, I might lean back and, pick my teeth or something. So there's not enough, except that it is a little bit horrifying. You'd have to be very careful. I was going to suggest that maybe you self-publish Jay, and you do a fabulous story. I mean, you are a storyteller nature. It's in you. I've heard you numerous times at the Southeast Gathering and in India. And anyhow, but it might be kind of dicey to self-publish given the history of this guy. People came in Minnesota and beat him up in his own.
They took the Institute people who had assisted him in creating this biography and tore the Institute up and took the people at the Institute out and beat them up. So that's in
horrible.
Poona. That was in Poona.
Oh, that was in Poona. I thought you said he was a Minnesota
Yes.
person, but
The
he was
author
living in
from
India.
Minnesota had gone to Poona to this institute to do his research, and the institute was the target of the violence. I'm seeing two little messages here from Sanobar S. Who was the ruler who had his own body chopped up and buried all over India? I don't have a clue. There's also a note from Priya. Is Priya still here? Yes. And you say, so Shivaji's dad had 2 wives? I think he had 4 before he got done, but he did have 2 wives when he went to Bijapur with Shivaji. Shivaji had 4 wives. Wives were a good way to make peace treaties with people. Richard Sander, you got your hand up. Unmute.
Well, I don't have any real spiritual insight into all of this other than what you've explained as the precursor to the avatar. Goes in and cleans the place up and allows him to establish himself, which I think is important. But, it's a funny thing, as I've gotten older, I've gotten more almost gross in the way I conceptualize history. So it's like, how does someone with 30,000 horses get them water and dispose of their poop and feed them hay? I've always wondered about this. And even in America, which was much smaller dimensions of all this, it's always been amazing to me. It's like, you can't have 20,000 horses and 20,000 men without having water to drink and a place to poop. I know it sounds weird, but these things come up in my brain,
When I went, I visited the big red fort in Delhi, and I had a wonderful guide that he said, they got these touts at the doorway saying, I'll be your guide. And I got this guide, and he told me he was a retired history professor. And we went in, and he's going, and over here is the great palace, and over here is the Diwani Am. And I said, where did they poop? And he looked at me and said, okay. And he started taking me around and showing me all the backstory stuff. And it's so much more interesting in many ways, because how did they keep the place alive? How did they get the food? He says, here's the cooking area, here's the chopping area, here are the ovens, here are this. And he's laying out the infrastructure of the place to me, and talking about the people that kept the infrastructure going. So we hear about these kings and princesses and everything. It's the people beneath them. It's the infrastructure beneath them that is so amazing. And when I was at Shivaji's palace at Raigad, that was one of the things I was aware of, was where did they poop? I'd look for the privies. I'd look for the latrines, and they got them up there. They had a whole area where people pooped. Honest to God, the first thing I'm starting to write about about Jerusalem, right? And so one of my first questions is, where did they poop? And I haven't been to Jerusalem, but there is a giant Roman latrine. The Romans loved latrines, and they built giant co-ed latrines in Jerusalem for people when they took over Jerusalem. I don't know where they pooped before the Romans came. I don't know where the Greeks pooped, but the Romans did that. It's a very good question to ask.
I saw a picture once of some preserved, I don't know, it was Pompeii or whatever, but they had just a row, like you said, public, you know, common area with these holes cut into the stones, you know, that look like our toilets now. So it was a common sort of latrine, and so they must have water to flush through to go somewhere, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, if you're interested, when I started studying Judas Maccabees and the temple in Jerusalem at the time, pardon me, of the second temple, what had happened was that the Greeks and the Syrians were making changes to the temple. And one of the things at the time, the Greeks were, everybody in Jerusalem wanted to be a Greek. If you couldn't be a Greek, you know, the Greeks, the Jews do circumcision, and the Jews wanted to be Greek. When the Greeks moved in, they moved in and went into the temple courtyard and built a Greek bath. You know, one of these big places with baths and massagers and everything under the sun in it, oil rubs and all these things. They built a giant complex in the temple courtyard of baths. And the Jews were going there with Greeks, and they were embarrassed that they had been circumcised. So there was a little cottage industry that built up of trying to stretch what remained of a Jew's foreskin using weights so that they could have a long foreskin like the Greeks did. And I was going like, yeah, and here's pictures of the little weights, and here's how they stuck them in and everything. Like, oh gosh. Eventually, the priests at the temple had so much fun going to the baths that they ignored doing their duties. And they'd have to send people over to chase them out of the baths to come and do sacrifice animals and do the prayers and stuff like that. That's the decline of the temple that took place, that eventually Judas Maccabees got rid of. But it's an interesting story. But don't you like the foreskin story? I love the foreskin story.
That's amazing. Never heard anything like that. But
That's a good story.
well, you know, because it's a curiosity to me, how people develop civilization, so to speak. And I mean, it's been hot here recently, but if I were to go for 4 or 5 days, do a little yard work, do a little of this, and sweat and sweat and sweat, I mean, every civilization had to have a way of cleaning the body other than a lake, you know, or something like that, especially for towns, you know.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. And latrines, where do you put them?
I think the Romans were actually, I think the stories of their aqueducts are, and maybe their roads, of course, but were the most fascinating of all. I mean, I saw one on YouTube once where they went for like 30 kilometers or something, and with these arches and over land and gullies, and with no more than what we now consider standard, like a quarter of an inch for 4 feet, you know, as a drop for the water, so that gravity would flow, but it wouldn't be enough force to wipe away the stone in the walls of the aqueduct, you know. It couldn't go too fast, because at the end, you'd have just a big, you know, water slide, you know. You wouldn't have just, you know, it would just destroy itself. But so they planned everything with a marvelous amount of precision. But one more question, Jay, in your research, because I wondered about this too. Now, in order to sort of decorrupt some of my earlier thinking or learning or whatever it was, I always correct myself sometimes in my thinking about, oh yeah, that's a beautiful palace, and slaves built that.
Oh yeah.
You know, this wasn't like even in the Christian era, these people had no money. They hung around the church, maybe got fed once a day, had kids, and for 200 years they'd build a cathedral, you know, but they weren't
In
architects.
India, it was the untouchables that were the huge underclass. There were slaves, but the untouchables were considered to be totally the property of whoever owned the land. So like completely property of the land. And had no rights and were just beat up if they didn't do what the landowner said. They were the equivalent of slaves. They didn't even, I mean, I don't think the landowners even like fed them or anything. They were just dirt. And they're still having trouble trying to establish a human aspect to their descendants. But Richard, I will mention something since you were talking about roads. Interesting little factoid came up to me, which is all the railroad tracks in, I believe, Europe and maybe also in the US are the same size, the same width, the wheel width. Where did wheel width of trains come from? It came from the standard wheel width of horse carts. Where did the standard wheel width of horse carts come from? It was the wheel width that would fit into the ruts of the roads that the Romans had built. At the time of the Roman roads, there was basically everybody was making same size carts. And so ruts formed in the road, and it became a thing where you actually would need to build your cart to fit the ruts. If you see movies of China, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, they get on a road and the road has ruts and their carts fit the road ruts. Road ruts from ancient times are what we have for railway train sizes. It's just very, very surprising to me. I'm about done. I'm running out and I'm getting, my throat's getting tired.
Tell us we'll see you again. Revive, and we'd love to have another
You're really entertaining, Jay.
wonderful.
It's been a joy, a privilege for all of us, I think. But
well, don't forget that this is all because Mayor Baba. Mayor Baba is the thing that's making this happen. And there we go. I owe it all to him. And I hope he takes care of us.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
Jay Bob, everybody. I'm going to go now.
Jay Bob.
Jay
Jay Bob.
Take a break. Oh, we're so grateful. Thank you, Jay.
See you.
Thank you. Great.
Bye.
Bye.
Wow. Ooh, well.
thank you too, Betty. Thank you, Betty.
Oh, yeah.
Take a look at his talk on, it's Hanukkah. He gave us this wonderful talk about that whole Jewish history. Yeah, it's in our archives. Yeah. Wow, what a guy. Well, all right then. I think we could all take a break. I'm so glad everybody came. I feel like I can't promote it enough to do him justice. He's so good. Yeah. Okay. Take care. I'll sign off.
Bye.
Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba. Thank you, dear Baba. Ki Jai. All righty. See you next time, Jai Baba.
That was great.